They built 87 houses on my land, not by accident, on purpose. I inherited 40 acres in Kansas from my grandfather, paid off and pristine. Went to visit the property for the first time in 3 years and found an entire subdivision where my wheat fields used to be. Paved roads, streetlights, families moving furniture into houses they'd paid $520,000 each for. The HOA president, Vivian Blackwell, a woman who'd never worked an honest day but wore designer suits like armor, told me to my face I was a deadbeat squatter trying to scam hardworking families. Said her lawyer confirmed the land was abandoned, so adverse possession made it legally theirs. She'd already deposited $18 million in pre-sales. Here's what I did. Absolutely nothing. Let them finish construction. Watch them landscape, paint, install pools. Then I walked into federal court with my grandfather's original 1887 railroad deed. Ever been called crazy when you're holding the winning card? Drop your state below. Let's see where my land rights family is watching from. My name is Marcus Hartwell, and that 40 acres wasn't just property. It was survival. My grandfather Ezra bought those 40 acres in 1887 for $12 cash when the railroad was pushing west through Kansas. Most folks called it worthless prairie, but Ezra knew something they didn't. He built a farmhouse with his own hands, dug a well that never ran dry, and kept that land through the worst drought in Kansas history. During the Depression, when banks seized farms daily, Ezra held on by growing victory gardens and fixing neighbors' equipment for trade. When he died in 1978, he left everything to my father. When Dad passed 10 years ago, it became mine. 40 acres of family pride paid in full. I never lived on the land. My surveying career kept me traveling 3 states, measuring everything from pipeline routes to highway expansions. 20 years with the Army Corps of Engineers taught me precision, patience, and how to read land like other people read books. The 40 acres was my anchor. I'd visit twice yearly, spring turkey hunting, fall deer season, check the farmhouse, maintain the well, clear fallen trees, enough activity to keep it legally maintained, not abandoned. 3 years ago, work exploded. Colorado pipeline project, then Oklahoma highway surveys. I kept planning to visit Kansas, but you know how it goes. One contract leads to another and suddenly 3 years vanish. Last Tuesday, I finally broke free, loaded camping gear and drove the familiar route through wheat country, anticipating the peace that only comes from standing on land your family bled for. I turned onto the gravel road expecting prairie grass and grandfather's weathered farmhouse. Instead, I found suburbia, complete suburbia. 87 houses with manicured lawns, granite mailboxes, and children's laughter echoing where coyotes used to howl. This wasn't new construction. Families had been living here long enough to plant gardens and install trampolines. The smell of charcoal grills replaced prairie wildflowers. The sound of sprinkler systems drowned out meadowlark songs. I sat stunned in my truck, engine idling, watching soccer moms unload organic groceries where my grandfather once grew wheat to survive the Depression. That's when the white BMW appeared. She blocked my truck like a predator cornering prey. Outstepped perfection in designer clothing, blonde hair that had never seen honest work, a suit worth more than most people's monthly salary, and the predatory smile of someone who'd never been told no. "You can't park here," she announced, approaching with a folder thick as a Bible. "This is private property." I rolled down my window. "Ma'am, this is my private property." Her laugh could have shattered glass. "I'm Vivian Blackwell, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA. You, sir, are trespassing on legally claimed land." She thrust official documents at me like weapons. "Adverse possession, sweetie. Kansas law is crystal clear. Abandon land for 3 years. Someone else can claim it legally. We filed paperwork, improved the property, and sold 87 homes to families who invested their life savings." I studied the paperwork. City council approvals, development permits, environmental clearances. Everything looked legitimate, which made it terrifying. "What happened to my grandfather's farmhouse?" "Demolished for safety violations," Vivian said cheerfully. "Asbestos concerns. We're very conscious of public health." Grandfather's house, where 5 generations had learned to walk, where family recipes were passed down, where he died peacefully in his sleep, reduced to safety violations. The well? Filled in. Modern plumbing standards, you understand? The well he dug by hand during the Dust Bowl that had never run dry even when neighboring farms turned to desert was gone. From my core days, I knew that adverse possession requires specific legal conditions. The land must be openly occupied, continuously maintained, and genuinely abandoned by the original owner. But proving that requires evidence, documentation, and time I didn't have. Here's reality, Vivian continued. You abandoned this land. We improved it. Law says it's ours. You can waste money on lawyers or accept that progress marches on. I folded her papers and pocketed them. Thanks for the education. Smart choice. She turned toward her BMW. Welcome to the 21st century, Mr. Hartwell. I drove away without another word, my surveyor's mind already cataloging discrepancies in her story. Vivian Blackwell had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who measured land for a living. Most people would have hired the first lawyer they could find and started screaming about their rights. Not me. 20 years measuring disputed boundaries taught me that emotions lose court cases, evidence wins them. While I was researching, Vivian was busy covering her tracks. The morning after our confrontation, I got a certified letter from Blackstone & Associates, Kansas City's most expensive law firm. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding I stop harassing residents of Willowbrook Estates and a restraining order petition claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to families with children. Vivian's first move, paint me as the crazy ex-owner who couldn't accept reality. My countermove started at the Sedgwick County Courthouse. The smell of old paper and floor wax filled my nostrils as I climbed stairs worn smooth by a century of legal battles. I needed to understand exactly when and how my land had supposedly been abandoned. The clerk, Ruth, had been filing documents since the Carter administration. She pulled every record related to my property, and what I found made my coffee taste like bitter truth. Vivian's adverse possession claim had been filed exactly 3 years and 2 weeks ago, right after my last documented visit. Someone had been watching, waiting, timing their legal assault perfectly. But here's where my surveying background saved me. From land disputes in Germany, I'd learned that adverse possession requires open and notorious occupation for 3 consecutive years. You can't just file paperwork. You have to actively use the land, improve it, live on it. I spread county tax records across the research table like battlefield maps. According to documents, no property taxes had been paid on my land for 3 years. Not by me. The county had changed their billing address system. Not by Vivian either. She'd let taxes go delinquent to strengthen her abandonment claim. From my core training, I remembered a crucial legal principle. Delinquent tax property can't be claimed through adverse possession. The state gets first claim, not private developers. But Ruth provided the real breakthrough. That Blackwell woman was here last month, she whispered, asking about your property records. Wanted to know if anyone had been documenting visits, hunting licenses, camping permits, anything that proved you hadn't abandoned the place. My pulse quickened. What did you tell her? That hunting licenses get filed with the state, not here. She'd have to check Kansas Wildlife and Parks. I drove straight to Topeka, the taste of anticipation sharp in my mouth. What I found at the wildlife office demolished Vivian's case. Turkey hunting license, filed every spring for 15 years, including all 3 abandonment years. Deer hunting license, same story. Both required specific property locations where hunting would occur. State records proved I had documented legal visits to my property every single year Vivian claimed it was abandoned. You can't steal land the owner is actively using. But the evidence got even better. I'd also maintained enrollment in the Federal Conservation Reserve Program, an agricultural program paying landowners to preserve prairie habitat. Every year, including the supposed abandonment period, federal inspectors had verified my property was properly maintained for wildlife conservation. Vivian hadn't just stolen occupied land, she'd stolen federally protected conservation property. The drive back felt like Christmas morning, but I wasn't done collecting ammunition. At City Hall, my FOIA request for communications between council members and Blackwell Development revealed systematic corruption. Richard Blackwell, Vivian's husband and city council member, had voted on every permit for the subdivision built on my stolen land. One email made my hands shake. Honey, Hartwell situation handled. Council approved all permits unanimously. Construction starts Monday. Love, Dick. Vivian's reply, perfect. Pre-sales launch next week. 18 million projected. Cabo vacation, here we come. Municipal corruption, conflict of interest, conspiracy to defraud, but the smoking gun came from survey records. Crawford Land Services had surveyed both my original property and Vivian's development. Comparing their subdivision map with territorial land grants, I found deliberate boundary falsification. They'd moved my property lines exactly 50 feet to make Vivian's theft appear legal. From surveying school, I remembered that falsifying territorial boundaries constitutes federal fraud when it involves land grants older than statehood. The The sound of my truck engine became thinking music as I drove home with boxes of evidence. Each document was another nail in Vivian's coffin, but I needed to be strategic about timing. That evening, another certified letter arrived. This time, Vivian was escalating. A formal trespassing complaint filed with the sheriff's department claiming I'd been stalking residents and threatening property values. Her second move? Criminalize my investigation. But she'd made a critical error, filing false police reports while committing federal land fraud. That's what my army buddies would call target-rich environment. I smiled, filing her complaint with my growing evidence collection. Vivian thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn the difference between amateurs and professionals who measure land for a living. Time to show her what real strategy looked like. 3 days after my courthouse research, Vivian threw her biggest punch yet. A process server appeared at my door with a harassment lawsuit demanding $50,000 in damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress on innocent families. The complaint claimed my obsessive investigation was causing children nightmares and forcing families to consider selling homes they'd just bought. Vivian's message was clear: back off or I'll bankrupt you with legal fees. My response wasn't hiring lawyers. It was driving to the National Archives in Kansas City. See, Vivian had made a critical error. She'd picked a fight with someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with federal land disputes. From surveying military bases to mapping pipeline routes across state lines, I knew one ironclad rule. When federal jurisdiction applies, local laws become toilet paper. The smell of climate-controlled storage and old leather filled the archives as I requested every document related to 1887 railroad land grants in Sedgwick County. What I discovered made my hands shake with anticipation. My grandfather hadn't just bought farmland. He'd purchased it from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway under the Pacific Railway Act of 1862. That federal legislation granted railroad companies alternating sections along their routes, but with a crucial condition. If the railroad abandoned their route, all granted land reverted to original purchasers, or their heirs. The railway company had dissolved in 1923, but here's what made my surveyor's heart race. They'd never filed proper abandonment paperwork with the Federal Railroad Administration. Vivian hadn't just stolen my 40 acres. She'd built an entire subdivision on active federal railroad property. While I was uncovering federal crimes, Vivian was accelerating her local war. I learned this when Dorothy called, voice trembling with fury. "Marcus, that woman has been going door to door telling families you're trying to steal their homes. She's got people so terrified they're talking about hiring armed security." What's she telling them? That you're a con artist using fake documents to extort money from hardworking families. She showed them official papers proving the land was legally acquired. The beautiful irony, Vivian was using fraudulent documents to convince people my legitimate ownership was fraudulent. But Dorothy had gathered crucial intelligence. She's also asking weird questions about federal inspections. Wants to know if government agents have ever visited the property, if there are environmental concerns, anything that might attract federal attention. My pulse quickened. Vivian was terrified of federal involvement, which meant she understood her local legal shields wouldn't survive federal scrutiny. That evening, I contacted the EPA regional office. From environmental assessments during military projects, I remembered that wetlands receive federal protection regardless of local zoning. If Vivian had built on protected habitat without permits, she'd committed environmental crimes carrying prison sentences, not just fines. EPA Inspector Jennifer Walsh agreed to survey the property. Any construction on protected wetlands without federal permits constitutes criminal environmental violation, she explained. We take that very seriously. While waiting for EPA inspection, I researched Vivian's financing. Public records showed Blackwell Development had borrowed $12 million from Midwest Regional Bank, using my property as collateral. The loan documents described the land as legally acquired through adverse possession with clear title. Bank fraud, another federal felony. But I needed proof Vivian knew she was committing federal crimes. That evidence arrived through Dorothy's kitchen window surveillance network. "Marcus, you need to see this," she called, waving a manila envelope. "I photograph everyone who visits that construction trailer. This morning, a federal inspector spent 3 hours there examining survey stakes. The photos showed a Federal Railroad Administration official measuring boundaries and taking soil samples. If the FRA was investigating, Vivian knew federal authorities were closing in on her operation. Her desperate acceleration suddenly made perfect sense. She was racing to complete final sales before federal enforcement arrived. The next morning brought Vivian's most desperate move yet. She'd organized a community safety meeting at the Willowbrook Clubhouse, inviting all homeowners to discuss protecting their investment from frivolous legal challenges. According to the flyer Dorothy showed me, Vivian was presenting expert legal testimony about why adverse possession claims were completely valid and uncontestable. She's trying to lock them into her version of events, I realized. Get them psychologically committed to fighting any challenge to their ownership. But Vivian's meeting backfired spectacularly. Dorothy attended as my unofficial spy and reported that several homeowners had started asking uncomfortable questions. Why hadn't they received clear titles yet? Why were their mortgage companies requesting additional documentation? Why had a federal inspector been measuring their properties? The smell of fear was apparently thick in that clubhouse, as families realized their dream homes might be built on legally questionable land. That's when I knew Vivian's local strategy was crumbling. Scared homeowners would demand answers she couldn't provide without admitting federal crimes. The taste of impending victory filled my mouth as I prepared the final phase of evidence collection. Vivian had escalated a simple property dispute into a federal case involving the EPA, FRA, and banking regulators. Time to coordinate with those agencies and watch her empire collapse under federal scrutiny. The morning after Vivian's community meeting, she played what she thought was her ace card. A black town car pulled into my driveway at 7 a.m. Out stepped a man in a $1,000 suit carrying a briefcase worth more than most people's cars. Behind him, Vivian emerged from her white BMW like a queen arriving for a coronation. "Mr. Hartwell," the lawyer said, extending a manicured hand, "I'm Jonathan Blackstone from Blackstone and Associates. Mrs. Blackwell has authorized me to make you a very generous offer." He opened his briefcase with theatrical precision and pulled out a cashier's check. $2 million, made out to Marcus Hartwell. "This represents fair market value for your claimed interest in the Willowbrook property," Blackstone continued. "Accept this settlement, sign a release of all claims, and this unfortunate misunderstanding disappears forever." Vivian watched my face like a predator studying wounded prey. "It's more money than you've probably seen in your lifetime, Marcus. Enough to buy land somewhere else and forget Kansas ever existed." The smell of expensive cologne mixed with morning dew as I studied the check. $2 million would solve every financial problem I'd ever have. I could disappear, let 87 families keep their homes, never fight another legal battle, but it would also let Vivian escape justice for stealing federal land. "What's the catch?" I asked. "No catch," Blackstone smiled. "Just common sense. You acknowledge that Willowbrook was legally developed, that adverse possession was properly executed, and you release all future claims." Vivian leaned forward. "Marcus, be practical. Even if you somehow win in court, which you won't, litigation takes years and costs hundreds of thousands. This way, everyone wins and those families get to keep their homes." She'd found my weak spot. Those 87 families had invested their life savings in houses they believed were legally theirs. Destroying Vivian's empire might destroy innocent people, too. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course," Blackstone replied. "But this offer expires in 72 hours. Market conditions change rapidly." After they left, I stared at that check for an hour, torn between justice and mercy. Then I called EPA Inspector Walsh. "Jennifer, I need to accelerate that environmental survey. Can you come out this week?" "Actually, I can be there this afternoon. We've received concerning reports about wetlands violations in your area." The EPA survey that afternoon was devastating for Vivian. Walsh identified 3 protected habitats within the subdivision: rare prairie grass listed under the Endangered Species Act, seasonal wetlands providing critical bird migration stopover, and a prairie dog colony buried under house foundations. "Mr. Hartwell," Walsh said, marking GPS coordinates, "this entire development violates multiple federal environmental statutes. Construction without environmental impact assessments constitutes criminal negligence." The smell of endangered prairie grass mixed with fresh concrete as we documented each violation. Every photo Walsh took added federal charges to Vivian's growing criminal case. But I wasn't ready to spring my trap yet. The next day, I called Blackstone. "I'm interested in the settlement but need clarifications about the terms." "Excellent," he replied, relief evident in his voice. "What questions can I answer?" "I want to understand exactly what I'm releasing claims to. Can you provide detailed property descriptions, including all federal easements and environmental designations?" Long pause. "Environmental designations? If I'm signing away all rights, I need disclosure of any endangered species habitats or protected wetlands. Federal law requires that, right? Another pause. I'll research that and get back to you. Vivian was about to discover her property sat on a federal environmental minefield. While Blackstone scrambled to research environmental laws he'd ignored, I was building my final evidence piece. At the Federal Railroad Administration office in Kansas City, District Administrator Robert Chen confirmed my worst fears and best hopes. Mr. Hartwell, this railroad easement was never formally abandoned. Any construction without FRA approval constitutes federal trespassing, Chen said, reviewing satellite imagery. Approximately 60% of Willowbrook sits on protected railway corridor. But Chen dropped an even bigger bomb. We've been monitoring this situation for months. The Army Corps flagged it during highway project surveys. Your property dispute is now part of a coordinated federal investigation. The sound of federal jurisdiction slamming shut around Vivian's operation was sweeter than prairie birdsong. What does that mean for the families living there? That depends on how cooperative everyone is with federal authorities. Solutions exist that protect innocent homeowners while addressing the underlying crimes. I drove home knowing the feds were already building their case. The taste of inevitable justice filled my mouth. That evening, Blackstone called with panic barely concealed in his voice. Mr. Hartwell, we've encountered complications with the environmental research. Perhaps we should modify the settlement terms. What kind of complications? There appear to be federal environmental considerations that weren't addressed during original development. I smiled at the phone. How unfortunate. I guess I need more time to consider your offer. How much time? Oh, probably until the federal investigation concludes. The sound of Blackstone's confidence crumbling was almost audible. Vivian's empire was about to learn what happens when local corruption collides with federal law enforcement, and I had front row seats for the spectacular collapse. 2 days before Blackstone's settlement deadline, I made the discovery that would change everything. I was in the National Archives basement, surrounded by boxes of railroad documents that hadn't been opened since the Eisenhower administration, when I found it buried in a manila folder marked ATSF Dissolution, 1923. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway Company's official dissolution papers. But it wasn't what was in the file that stopped my heart. It was what wasn't there. According to federal law, when railroad companies dissolve, they must file Form 4571 with the Interstate Commerce Commission, formally abandoning all land grants and easements. Without this form, railroad corridors remain federally protected in perpetuity, regardless of whether trains still run. The Santa Fe Railway had filed every document required for corporate dissolution, except Form 4571. My hands trembled as I cross-referenced the missing form with my grandfather's original 1887 purchase deed. The railway company had sold Ezra 40 acres under a reversionary clause. Standard language meaning if the railroad ever abandoned the route, all land would revert to the original purchaser or his heirs. Since the railroad had dissolved without properly abandoning their corridor, my grandfather's reversionary rights had been triggered automatically in 1923. I didn't just own 40 acres. According to federal law, I owned the entire 2-mile railroad corridor, including every square foot of Willowbrook Estates. The smell of century-old paper and the sound of my racing heartbeat filled the archives as I photographed every document. 87 families had purchased homes on land I'd legally owned for over a century. But the implications went deeper than property ownership. Every home sale in Willowbrook was legally void. Every mortgage was invalid. Every property tax payment had been collected fraudulently. The entire subdivision existed without any legal foundation. I could invalidate every single transaction with one federal court filing. The drive back to Kansas felt like floating. I had the nuclear option, the power to erase Vivian's entire empire and leave 87 families homeless. But with that power came a terrible moral weight. These weren't Vivian's victims. They were mine too. Families who'd saved for years to buy dream homes, children who'd made friends in new neighborhoods, elderly couples who'd planned to retire in Kansas prairie peace. Destroying Vivian would destroy them too. That evening, I sat in my kitchen staring at copies of the railroad documents spread across my table like tarot cards predicting the future. The taste of black coffee mixed with the bitter flavor of absolute power. I could demand every family vacate immediately. I could sue for damages equal to every dollar Vivian had stolen. I could watch her empire collapse while innocent families lost everything. Or I could find another way. From my military experience, I knew that the most devastating weapons are often the ones you never fire. Sometimes the threat of total destruction accomplishes more than destruction itself. Vivian didn't know about the railroad corridor reversal yet. She still believed adverse possession gave her legal cover, that federal environmental violations were her biggest problem, that offering me settlement money would make everything disappear. She had no idea she'd built her empire on land she could never legally own. I decided to let her keep building, keep selling, keep believing she was winning. Let her invest more money, make more promises, dig herself deeper into federal crimes. Meanwhile, I would document everything, every sale, every mortgage, every fraudulent transaction. When the time came to spring my trap, I'd have evidence of systematic fraud affecting dozens of financial institutions, hundreds of legal contracts, and multiple federal agencies. The sound of prairie wind through my kitchen window carried the distant laughter of children playing in Willowbrook's streets. Those children deserved protection from the storm that was coming. I folded the railroad documents carefully and locked them in my grandfather's old safe. Vivian Blackwell was about to learn the difference between stealing property and stealing federal transportation corridors. But those innocent families would be protected, even if it meant letting Vivian think she was winning a little longer. Justice was coming, but it would come with mercy. The morning after discovering the railroad reversal clause, I woke up with the clarity that only comes from holding absolute power and choosing not to use it, yet. Vivian thought she was fighting a stubborn farmer with a property dispute. She had no idea she was about to face a coordinated federal investigation involving multiple agencies, 20 years of surveying expertise, and evidence that could land her in federal prison. Time to build the perfect case. First call, EPA Inspector Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer, I need to discuss something confidential about the Willowbrook investigation, I said, driving toward Kansas City with my truck loaded with evidence boxes. Actually, Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. We've expanded our investigation based on what we found during the site survey. Can you meet me at the federal building this afternoon? The Richard Bowling Federal Building in Kansas City smelled like government coffee and the quiet efficiency of people who take federal crimes seriously. Walsh led me to a conference room where I met the team that would become Vivian's nightmare. FBI agent Sarah Martinez, white-collar crime specialist. We're investigating municipal corruption allegations related to the Blackwell development permits. Federal Railroad Administration District Chief Robert Chen. The illegal construction on protected railway corridors falls under our jurisdiction. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kim. Bank fraud and environmental crimes are federal felonies. We're building a comprehensive case. Environmental lawyer Rebecca Santos, representing the Sierra Club. This case could set precedent for protecting prairie habitats nationwide. As I spread my grandfather's railroad documents across the conference table, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jesus Christ, Agent Martinez whispered, studying the 1887 deed. They built an entire subdivision on federally protected railroad land without knowing the original owner retained reversionary rights? It gets worse, I said, pulling out the municipal corruption evidence. The city council member who approved all permits is married to the developer. They've been coordinating this fraud for years. Attorney Kim's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. RICO predicate offenses. We can prosecute this as organized crime. From my military days, I remembered that RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, allows federal prosecutors to charge entire criminal enterprises, not just individual crimes. If Vivian had been systematically defrauding multiple victims, RICO could dismantle her entire operation. Agent Martinez opened her laptop. We've been monitoring Blackwell Development's financial transactions. Over the past 3 years, they've used fraudulent land ownership claims to secure loans from 7 different banks. Total exposure? $43 million. The sound of federal prosecutors smelling blood was almost audible. But I needed to address the elephant in the room. 87 innocent families who'd lose their homes if we prosecuted too aggressively. What happens to the homeowners? I asked. Attorney Kim leaned back in his chair. That depends on how we structure the case. Federal asset forfeiture could seize the entire development, leaving families homeless. Or we could negotiate a settlement that protects innocent purchasers while prosecuting the criminals. Environmental lawyer Santos nodded. Community land trusts can preserve affordable housing while restoring environmental protections. It's been done before in similar cases. The taste of possible justice mixed with mercy filled my mouth. Over the next 4 hours, we built a prosecution strategy that would make Sun Tzu proud. Phase 1. Complete evidence gathering while maintaining operational security. Let Vivian continue believing she was winning while federal agencies documented every aspect of her criminal enterprise. Phase 2. Coordinate simultaneous enforcement actions by EPA, FBI, FRA, and state banking regulators. Hit every aspect of her operation simultaneously to prevent evidence destruction. Phase 3. Offer homeowners protection through federal victim assistance programs while prosecuting Vivian and her conspirators under RICO statutes. Agent Martinez handed me a secure phone. We need you to continue normal contact with Blackwell and her lawyers. Don't let them know federal agencies are coordinating investigation. You want me to be an informant? You want justice that protects innocent families? This is how we get both. The drive home felt like returning from a military briefing. I had federal backup, unlimited investigative resources, and a prosecution team that understood both the legal complexities and moral implications of the case. But I also had a dangerous job, pretending to be a confused property owner while actually serving as the federal government's inside source on an organized crime investigation. That evening, Blackstone called right on schedule. "Mr. Hartwell, we need your decision on the settlement offer. Mrs. Blackwell is becoming impatient with delays." "I understand," I replied, thinking about the FBI recording equipment Agent Martinez had given me. "I'm still reviewing the environmental disclosure documents you promised. Federal law requires complete transparency about endangered species habitats, right? We're working on that research. Take your time. I want to make sure I understand all the federal implications before signing anything." The sound of Blackstone's frustrated sigh was music to my ears. Vivian thought she was pressuring me with legal deadlines. She was actually giving federal investigators more time to build an airtight case against her entire criminal organization. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even know it yet. Vivian's next move proved she was starting to panic. 3 days after my federal building meeting, I woke up to find my truck's tires slashed and scam artist spray painted across my garage door. The smell of fresh paint mixed with Kansas morning air as I photographed the vandalism for Agent Martinez. But Vivian wasn't done with intimidation tactics. That afternoon, a Sedgwick County Sheriff's deputy knocked on my door with a restraining order petition. Vivian was claiming I'd been stalking homeowners and photographing children in Willowbrook Estates. The petition demanded I stay at least 500 feet from the subdivision and cease all harassing contact with residents. "Ma'am," I told the deputy, "I haven't been within a mile of that subdivision in 2 weeks. Just serving papers, sir. You'll need to appear in court Thursday to contest the order." Vivian's strategy was becoming desperate. If she couldn't buy me off or scare me away, she'd use the legal system to muzzle me while she completed her final sales. My phone rang before the deputy's car was out of my driveway. "Marcus, it's Dorothy. You need to know what's happening over here." Her voice was shaking with anger. "That Blackwell woman held another emergency meeting last night. She told everyone you've been threatening families and taking pictures of their children. Did anyone believe her? Some did, but others are asking harder questions. Why is a federal inspector still measuring property boundaries? Why haven't final title transfers been completed? Why are there mortgage companies requesting additional documentation?" The sound of Vivian's lies crumbling under resident scrutiny was beautiful. "Dorothy, I need you to be careful. Don't let anyone know you're talking to me." "Too late for that, honey. I already told several neighbors that I've known you for 30 years and you're not capable of threatening anyone. Some of them want to meet with you." That evening, my secure phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez. "Emergency meeting, federal building, 1 hour." I arrived to find the entire prosecution team in crisis mode. "We've got a problem," Martinez announced. "Vivian just accelerated everything. She's planning to complete all remaining home sales within the next 10 days, then liquidate Blackwell Development and transfer assets offshore." Attorney Kim pulled up financial surveillance records on his laptop. She opened accounts in the Cayman Islands yesterday. Classic money laundering setup before fleeing prosecution. "How do you know all this?" "We've been monitoring her communications since you brought us the corruption evidence," Martinez explained. "She knows federal agencies are investigating. She's trying to grab everything she can and run." Environmental lawyer Santos leaned forward. "If she completes those sales before we file charges, it becomes much harder to protect the homeowners. Once those properties are fully transferred, unwinding the fraud gets exponentially more complicated." The taste of urgency filled my mouth. We were in a race against time, and Vivian had a head start. "What do you need from me?" Chen from the Railroad Administration answered, "We need you to buy us time. Keep her thinking you're still considering the settlement while we expedite federal seizure warrants." "How?" "Schedule a meeting to discuss the settlement terms. Make her think you're close to accepting. Every day we delay her escape timeline gives us more time to coordinate enforcement. I called Blackstone that night, fighting to keep my voice steady. Jonathan, I've been thinking about your offer. I'd like to meet with Mrs. Blackwell directly to discuss some modifications to the settlement terms. Modifications? His voice was carefully neutral. Nothing dramatic. I just want to understand the long-term implications for the community. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. Long pause. I'll speak with Mrs. Blackwell and get back to you. The next morning brought Vivian's most desperate gambit yet. She appeared at my door alone, without lawyers, without her usual entourage of intimidation. Just a woman in a designer suit who was finally understanding how badly she'd miscalculated. "Marcus," she said, her voice honey-sweet with desperation, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to start over." The smell of expensive perfume couldn't mask the scent of fear radiating from her. "What did you have in mind?" "Full partnership. You become a silent partner in Blackwell Development. 50-50 split of all future profits. You keep your family connection to the land, and we both get rich." I studied her face, looking for tells. Her left eye twitched slightly, a stress indicator I'd learned to recognize during interrogations in the Army. "What about the homeowners? They keep their homes. We both profit from future developments. Everyone wins. Think about it, Marcus. This could set you up for life." She was offering me everything: money, power, revenge against the system that had tried to steal my land. All I had to do was become complicit in her crimes. "That's generous," I said slowly. "Let me think about it." "Don't think too long. Market conditions change quickly in our business." After she left, I called Martinez immediately. "She just offered to make me a full partner in her criminal enterprise," I reported. "Perfect. We'll have everything we need for conspiracy charges." The sound of federal handcuffs clicking shut around Vivian's operation was getting louder every day. Vivian's partnership offer was her biggest mistake yet, and she was about to compound it spectacularly. 2 days after our meeting, she launched what can only be described as a full-scale assault on my reputation. The Wichita Eagle ran a front-page story titled "Local Man's Frivolous Claims Threaten Family Homes," complete with photos of worried Willowbrook residents and quotes from legal experts explaining why adverse possession was settled law. But the article revealed more than Vivian intended. She'd hired a public relations firm to coordinate the media campaign, paid for billboards around Sedgwick County claiming I was an opportunistic scammer, and organized a GoFundMe to help families defend their homes against frivolous lawsuits. The smell of desperation was unmistakable. People confident in their legal position don't spend hundreds of thousands on PR campaigns. Agent Martinez called within hours of the article's publication. "She just handed us a gift," Martinez said, barely containing her excitement. "Using fraudulent media campaigns to influence potential jury pools is jury tampering. Add that to witness intimidation, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy charges." Destruction of evidence? Our surveillance team photographed her construction crew removing environmental survey markers yesterday. She's trying to eliminate proof of wetlands violations before EPA can complete their investigation. But Vivian's most catastrophic error came that afternoon. Dorothy called, voice trembling with urgency. "Marcus, you need to hear this. Vivian just offered 3 homeowners cash payments to sign affidavits swearing they've never seen federal inspectors on the property. She's trying to bribe witnesses? Worse, she told them the federal government is planning to seize their homes unless they help her prove there are no environmental violations. She's got these poor families terrified they'll lose everything. From my military interrogation training, I knew that threatening federal seizure to coerce false testimony constituted multiple felonies: witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and making false statements about federal law enforcement. But Vivian wasn't done digging her legal grave. That evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a Willowbrook resident, a young mother with twin toddlers clinging to her legs. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Sarah Chen. I live at 847 Maple Street. Can we talk?" I invited her in, noting how her hands shook as she accepted coffee. "Mrs. Blackwell came to my house today," Sarah began. "She said you're trying to steal our homes, but that if enough residents sign a petition claiming you abandoned the land, you'll lose your lawsuit." "What kind of petition?" "Swearing that the land was completely abandoned for over 3 years. No hunting, no camping, no maintenance. She said if we don't sign, the federal government will declare our mortgages invalid and foreclose on everyone." The taste of pure fury filled my mouth. Vivian was terrorizing innocent families with lies about federal policy while soliciting perjured affidavits to support her fraud. Sarah, has anyone from the federal government contacted you directly? No. Everything we've heard came through Mrs. Blackwell or her lawyers. I pulled out Agent Martinez's card. I want you to call this number tomorrow. Tell Agent Martinez exactly what Mrs. Blackwell asked you to sign. Sarah's eyes widened. Is this real? Are we actually going to lose our homes? The federal government doesn't seize homes from innocent families who were defrauded by developers. There are programs to protect people in your situation. After Sarah left, I immediately called the secure line. Martinez, she's crossed every line. Witness tampering, terrorizing federal crime victims, suborning perjury. We know. We've been monitoring her communications all day. She's planning to present those fraudulent affidavits in state court next week to get an injunction blocking any federal investigation. Attorney Kim joined the conference call. Using fabricated evidence to obstruct federal investigations is a RICO predicate. She's just qualified for organized crime prosecution. But the perfect storm was just beginning. The next morning brought news that made even seasoned federal prosecutors whistle in amazement. Chen from the Railroad Administration called with an update that changed everything. Marcus, we've been investigating other Blackwell developments across Kansas. She's been using the same fraudulent adverse possession scheme on railroad corridor land in 3 other counties. How many properties? Over 200 homes, all built on federal railroad easements without proper authorization. All sold using forged property documents. Agent Martinez's voice was grim when she called an hour later. We're not just looking at local fraud anymore. This is a multi-county organized crime operation involving hundreds of victims and multiple federal agencies. The sound of federal law enforcement machinery accelerating into high gear was thunderous. What's the timeline now? We execute coordinated arrests Monday morning. FBI, EPA, FRA, and state banking regulators hit every Blackwell property simultaneously. She won't have time to destroy evidence or flee the country. That weekend, I sat on my front porch watching sunset paint the Kansas sky gold, thinking about the perfect storm Vivian had created. She'd started with simple property theft, then escalated to municipal corruption, environmental crimes, bank fraud, witness tampering, and now organized racketeering across multiple jurisdictions. Each desperate move to save herself had only made the eventual reckoning more devastating. The taste of perfect justice was almost overwhelming. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived like thunder across the Kansas prairie. At exactly 6 a.m., I watched from my kitchen window as black SUVs with government plates surrounded the Willowbrook construction trailer. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged like a coordinated army, followed by EPA investigators, Railroad Administration officials, and state banking regulators. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the taste of pure satisfaction as I watched Vivian's empire crumble in real time. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez. Phase 1 complete. Arrest warrants executed. See you in federal court at 2 p.m. But the real fireworks were just beginning. By 9 a.m., every local news station had crews at Willowbrook filming FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence from the construction trailer. Confused homeowners gathered in small groups, some crying, others demanding answers from anyone wearing a badge. I drove to Dorothy's house to check on the neighborhood mood. "Marcus," she called from her kitchen window. "It's chaos over here. Federal agents have been knocking on doors all morning telling families they're victims of organized crime." Through her window, I watched EPA investigators taking soil samples from what used to be my grandfather's wheat fields, while Railroad Administration surveyors marked the protected corridor boundaries with bright orange flags. The visual was devastating. 87 homes sitting inside a clearly marked federal transportation zone, like houses built in the middle of an interstate highway. At 1:30 p.m., I arrived at the federal courthouse in Wichita to find a media circus. News vans lined the street. Protesters held signs reading "Protect Family Homes" and "Prosecute Land Thieves." And curious onlookers packed the courthouse steps. Inside, the gallery was standing room only. Homeowners filled the front rows, many clutching mortgage documents and looking terrified. Behind them sat reporters, federal agents, and environmental activists who'd been following the case. At exactly 2 p.m., Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and the circus became a courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Morrison announced, "we're here for emergency proceedings in United States v. Blackwell Development Corporation et al. This case involves allegations of organized criminal activity affecting federal lands and multiple financial institutions." Attorney Kim rose from the prosecution table. "Your Honor, The United States seeks immediate asset forfeiture and injunctive relief to prevent further criminal activity by the defendants. That's when the courtroom doors opened and Vivian Blackwell entered in handcuffs. Gone was the designer suit and predatory confidence. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd just discovered that federal prosecutors don't negotiate with organized crime the way local lawyers handle property disputes. Behind her came Richard Blackwell, also in handcuffs, followed by surveyor Thomas Crawford and lawyer Jonathan Blackstone. The sound of gasps from the homeowners section was audible as they realized the scope of the conspiracy. Judge Morrison reviewed the arrest warrants. Mrs. Blackwell, you're charged with RICO violations, bank fraud, environmental crimes, witness tampering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. How do you plead? Vivian's voice was barely audible. Not guilty, Your Honor. Attorney Kim stood again. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence regarding the scope of this criminal enterprise. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my life. Kim displayed satellite imagery showing the entire Willowbrook development sitting on the protected railroad corridor. Then he showed my grandfather's 1887 deed with the reversionary clause that made me the legal owner of the entire corridor. Your Honor, Kim continued, the defendant built and sold 87 homes on federal land she never owned, using fraudulent adverse possession claims to deceive banks, homeowners, and municipal authorities. Judge Morrison studied the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. Mr. Kim, are you telling this court that every home sale in this development was legally invalid from the beginning? That's correct, Your Honor. However, the United States recognizes that the homeowners are victims, not criminals. We're prepared to work with all parties to protect innocent purchasers while ensuring justice for the perpetrators. That's when I stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, may I address the court? Judge Morrison looked surprised. You are? Marcus Hartwell, Your Honor, the legal owner of the property in question. A murmur swept through the courtroom as people realized the man whose land had been stolen was sitting among them. Mr. Hartwell, this is highly irregular. Your Honor, I have a proposal that might protect both justice and the innocent families who were defrauded. Judge Morrison considered for a moment. Proceed, but briefly. I stood and turned to face the homeowners section, looking into the scared faces of families who'd invested everything in homes they thought were legally theirs. I propose establishing a community land trust that allows current residents to remain in their homes while restoring federal environmental protections and ensuring this kind of fraud never happens again. The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Vivian Blackwell stared at me with the expression of someone who'd finally understood she'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. Your Honor, I continued, sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about making things right for everyone who was wronged. Judge Morrison smiled slightly. Mr. Hartwell, that may be the most reasonable thing anyone has said in a federal courtroom this year. The gavel came down like thunder, and Vivian Blackwell's empire was officially over. 6 months later, I stood on the exact spot where my grandfather had built his farmhouse, watching something that would have made him proud. The Hartwell Community Land Trust was unlike anything Kansas had ever seen. 87 families kept their homes through federal victim assistance programs, while Vivian seized criminal proceeds, over $42 million, funded environmental restoration and permanent affordable housing protections. Vivian herself was serving 12 years in federal prison for RICO violations. Richard got 8 years for municipal corruption. Crawford lost his surveying license forever and got 5 years for federal land fraud. Even lawyer Blackstone got 3 years for conspiracy. Perfect justice served with mercy for the innocent. The smell of restored native prairie grass now mixed with children's laughter in backyards that were finally legally theirs. Where Vivian had paved over endangered wetlands, we'd restored habitat that attracted over 60 species of migrating birds and re-established the prairie dog colonies she'd buried under house foundations. Dorothy, now the unofficial historian of what locals called the Great Land Liberation, spent mornings tending her garden and afternoons giving tours to law students, environmental groups, and property rights advocates studying our community model. Marcus, she called from her kitchen window, your grandfather would be dancing. She was right. The restored prairie stretched endlessly west, dotted with the original 87 homes, but now surrounded by protected wetlands, native grass, and hiking trails connecting to a regional conservation network that spanned 3 counties. The Ezra Hartwell Environmental Education Center occupied the spot where Vivian's construction trailer used to sit. Built from reclaimed barn wood and powered by wind energy, it served as research headquarters for Kansas State's Prairie Restoration Program and training center for landowners fighting development fraud across 12 states. Inside, visitors could see the original 1887 railroad deed that had saved 87 families, alongside interactive displays showing how federal environmental laws protect rural communities from corrupt developers. But the center's most popular exhibit was the Victory Wall, photographs chronicling Vivian's crimes, the federal investigation, and the community solution that emerged from her attempted theft. The numbers were staggering. Property values in Willowbrook had increased 37% after federal protection was established. Environmental tourism brought $1.2 million annually to local businesses. The Education Center created 43 permanent jobs. Most importantly, federal legislation inspired by our case now protects rural landowners in 38 states. But the real victory was simpler. That evening, I sat on my front porch with coffee in my grandfather's favorite mug, watching sunset paint the Kansas sky the same gold he'd seen for 90 years. The sound of restored prairie wind through native grass mixed with distant laughter of children whose homes were now protected forever. Families who'd been terrorized by Vivian's threats now hosted block parties on land that legally belonged to their community trust. Children rode bikes on streets named after prairie flowers instead of dead relatives. Elderly couples sat on porches knowing their retirement dreams were secure under federal protection. My phone buzzed with a text from FBI agent Martinez. Montana rancher needs help. Similar HOA fraud involving golf course construction on family cattle ranch. Sound familiar? I smiled, thinking about the next battle. 20 years of surveying experience, federal law expertise, and a proven track record of protecting families while prosecuting criminals had made me something unexpected. A professional defender of property rights. The taste of perfect justice, punishment for criminals, protection for victims, restoration for communities, never got old. I pulled out my grandfather's original deed, now framed and hanging by my front door. Ezra Hartwell had paid $12 for 40 acres in 1887. That investment had grown into a protected prairie corridor worth millions, home to 87 families, and a model for environmental justice that would outlast us all. Some legacies are measured in money, others are measured in land that can never again be stolen. The coyotes began their evening song across prairie that belonged to the community forever, and I knew my grandfather was finally at peace. Justice isn't just about winning, it's about building something thieves can never steal. Ever had a Karen steal what's rightfully yours and call it community improvement? Drop your property nightmare in the comments. You'd be shocked how many hopeless cases have federal solutions waiting to be discovered. And smash that subscribe button for HOA Tales, because that Montana rancher's battle involves a golf course, missing cattle, and railroad land that's been in his family since 1886. Trust me, this revenge story will make Vivian's downfall look like a warm-up act. Justice isn't just sweet, it's a dish best served with federal law enforcement.